Hi, welcome. My name is Carolina Valencia. Thanks you for attending this virtual event organized by Word Up Community Bookshop. If you don't know, Word Up is a bookshop and art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers. We started as a 1 month long pop-up shop in 2011, then stuck around due to overwhelming community demand. And this past June, we actually celebrated our 10th anniversary. We can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street in Washington Heights, New York City. We host events for all ages and sell used and new books in English and Spanish. You can check us out at wordupbooks.com to shop and see other virtual and outdoor events that we have. We're open Tuesdays through Fridays, 12 to 6 p.m. and Saturdays, 11 to 5 p.m. But we're excited for tonight's event. We have today Peter Murrieta and Jeffrey Mariotte with Robert Dominguez, who is the managing editor of the New York Daily News and has been an editor and reporter on various desks for a paper since 1990.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Hey, nice to meet you. You're Jeffrey, right?
Yeah, it's good to meet you, Robert.
Okay, good to meet you. And is Peter on as well?
I'm here. Can you see me?
I can. Good to meet you both. I want to just congratulate you before we start. I read the book. I found it eminently readable, extremely cinematic, which we'll get to later on because I'm sure that's the end game here after everything else. And it's just such a wonderful way. This is something. I mean, I've heard of Joaquin Murrieta. Is that how you pronounce it?
Murrieta, yeah. See.
Ever since I was a kid, and I'm not sure if it's actually accurate that he was the inspiration for Zorro later on, but we can get into that as well. And having read the book and then delving a little bit deeper into the history of it, not only did you take an amazing story or myth or legend, and however you want to phrase it, the two of you, but what was fascinating is that you turned it into such a readable novel where you could have gone the nonfiction route as well. I mean, it was one or the other, I guess. So that's basically my first question. Number one is, how did the two of you get together to craft this monstrosity of a book? Because it's like 600 pages, which I had no idea. And in a nice way, monstrosity. And I think, and then we'll get into the most interesting aspect of it. You're a descendant of the protagonist, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so whichever one of you want to go first.
Great.
And just
well,
the genesis
I'll answer first about sort of the origin of our origin, and then toss it over to my partner. I grew up, as you said, this is my ancestor. This is the stories that we've been told as kids and passed down. And my father's name is Joaquin. My son's name is Joaquin. There's generally a Joaquin in every generation. So it's a story I've always wanted to tell. I have a career as a screenwriter and a TV writer. When I was looking for ways to get this into the world, I was introduced to Jeffrey, who was working already on something and was incredibly kind to welcome me into the process and bring me in. And it was really amazing. And I think that in the world of entertainment, covering everything, I think it's easier for us to get Joaquin's story out this way than it is to sort of bang your head against, some of the walls that exist in Hollywood in terms of representation and access and those kinds of things.
Okay. And as for me, I'm primarily a novelist. I also have been an editor and work in the comic book business, comic book publishing, and I've written a lot of comics and graphic novels, but mostly novels these days. And I've been kind of pushing more and more into the Western milieu. And I've been fascinated with Joaquin since I was in college in San Jose, California, and made a couple of trips into the gold country up there and picked up a mass market paperback with this really lurid cover about him and read it. And it's like, this guy's fascinating.
It was the John Ridge? Was it the John Ridge?
I think it was. I can't find it. I believe I still own it, but I can't find it. But I think it was the Ridge.
Yeah.
Was he also called Yellowbird?
Yeah, Yellowbird, yeah. Here. I have this shelf is lined with all these little
I can see.
Joaquin books.
Oh yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a nicer edition than the one I had.
Yeah. I know the one you're
this,
talking about. It used to have a blue cover, and
yep,
it was
Yep, that's the one. And I found the character fascinating for years. I've tried to figure a way into the story, and finally thought I had it. But when I had the chance to meet Peter and get the inside story that wasn't in any of the books, I knew that was just going to enrich the whole project in so many ways, just bring it to life in ways that I couldn't do by myself. So the two of us got together, and that's what we came up with.
It's an artistic collaboration that seems to be predestined. Let's put it that way.
for sure.
There are dozens and dozens, if you look into it, of versions of his story, whether it's old TV serials, movies, books dating back to around the 1850s, actually, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So what about your book is different from all the others? I mean, you took a tack that, like I said, it was a novel basically, but inspired by some true events, some legendary events. What makes it different from all the other ones? Is it the fact that 150 years later, you're able to assess all the different information that's out there, and then put your own version forth?
Well, I think for me, and again, I'll go quick and I'll let Jeffrey go long. I think it's a great question, Robert. And I think when you think about the fact that, this is my family, like, I think part of what makes it special is this is a descendant who's writing about their family, like that's special. But I also think you've hinted at it twice, like to make it a novel. When I look back on this shelf here, aside from the mass market paperback that Jeff picked up, a lot of these books are nonfiction, and they tend to pose the question of, like, did he exist? And half the book is trying to peel back that. And I think by moving into the novel territory, you get to say, like, who cares? Let's tell this story. And I think that's freeing, because I certainly know in our family, like, we never had that debate. We just were like, this is it. So I just think that's part of what makes it freeing and makes the novel work.
That's absolutely the main thrust that sets us apart from everything else that's ever been published, is having Peter's input, having the family's input over the generations. It's never been done. The other thing is, like you said, we were able to bring in all the scholarship from all the many years, which is still happening, still going on. And there are fairly recent publications that enlighten things more than what people knew in the past. So we were able to combine the legends and the stories, as well as with the factual stuff that we came up with, and tell it in a way that's never been told.
I think the other thing, to just button that up, Robert, and then is, like, also it's pretty, I don't know, I get, I wouldn't say emotional, but I get very, when I talk to my dad, who was an immigrant, and, it's pretty amazing that my family's now at a place where we have a writer. Like the amount of safety and, becoming American and all those things that you can write oodles and oodles of inches about. But, like, we've reached a point in this family where there's a writer, and that's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome.
Okay. Now, when you talk about your family, and how is his story passed down from generation to generation?
Oh, well, my friend Gigi and I talk about this because, everybody's got an abuelita, and they all want to tell you bedtime stories. And it's also interesting when Gigi and I talk about how often those bedtime stories are to scare the pants off you. And you think about that when you look back on your childhood, you're like, that's not for every culture. That seems to be specific to many other ones, but like the bedtime stories were sometimes to teach you a lesson and scare you. And, you know, we heard some of those Joaquin stories then. We'd hear them at family gatherings and, you know, weddings and at funerals. And there was always a little bit of a gather around. And, you know, I come from a family of storytellers. And so they were passed down verbally. And, you know, there's always a possible lesson. I think one of the things that we didn't cover in the book, so I don't mind, you know, sharing it, is like, we always talk about how, you know, he used to join posses that, you know, that were looking for him because he was lightly complected. He wasn't exactly the Mexican they were looking for. And so those stories would always come up around representation and identity when one of us was struggling at school or one of us was struggling to fit in, and we would hear that. So there was always this teaching us our history, but also teaching us how to be.
The one thing I got out of this, and now is a good time to talk about it with history and the cultural aspect of it, is it's almost everything that goes on, because it's set around, you know, the Mexican War, then it's set around the gold rush. He was basically, when you tear it down, whether it's 1850s or 2020s, he was a Mexican immigrant who crossed the border and found adventure and tragedy and was not accepted, racism, however you want to call it. And it's almost so reflective of the current times with what you have going on right now. Was that ever a consideration between the two of you, not to like press that, but to let the reader make his or her own parallels to that, to the current times and what we're going through?
I will say that Jeff's writing, his books, the other things that, I mean, it's so energetic. And so I would say that when you think about those things, it sort of excites me that we didn't have to like paint it for you. We just got to share this one. And then what's so great is when people come to us, and they do all the time, and I have it all the time, like, it's amazing how timeless this is. And, you know, I think that, you know, I'm both proud of it, but also when you think about it, and I'm sure, Robert, you have your own stories of like, it's exciting that it's timeless, and it's also a little bit devastating that it's timeless, that you're like, wow, we're here again. Yeah, we're here again.
For sure. I am a middle-class, past middle-aged white guy. I lived on the border for 14 years. Not right on the border, but like 11 miles from the border. So in a border community called Douglas, Arizona. And I knew people from both sides of the line, and I knew people who had, everyone in town had family on both sides of the line. And they would cross all the time. And this was from 2004 to 2016. Some of those periods were really bad at the border, where we had essentially armed posses out looking for people, of civilians looking for people, and camped along the highway, watching with night vision goggles, hoping to catch immigrants so they could do whatever they could to them. We had people pistol whipping immigrants and making citizens arrests that they weren't actually allowed to make, because it's a federal issue, not a county or state or private issue. And not only did I see that firsthand, and I went on the border with Border Patrol people and with friends. So I saw a lot of this firsthand, and that area is very rich with history. And I came to understand that the West was not the heterogeneous society that we see in the old TV Westerns and old movies that the West had some white guys in it, but it had a lot of guys who were not white, and had a lot of women, and it had gay people and bisexual people and people of every color. And in my Western work, I try to make that clear. I try to represent a little more thoroughly than traditional Westerns have represented in the past. So that's an important thing to me, and it's obviously key to the story of Joaquin. So we just put it in as we believe it happened.
There's something about a character like Joaquin, the Robin Hood, the bad boy, the bandido, the desperado. Those are Spanish words that are now English words, but you see, the evolution of it. But I think what's so good about the book, without giving away any of the plot to anyone who hasn't picked it up yet, he starts out as a teenager, and he's forced with that first witnessing an act of violence, and then the violence comes onto him as he grows up. He's forced to become what he is. And the book, can't sugarcoat it. It is violent at times, and it's very, graphic. And I think it was not an easy period to live in. And I think you should have gone down that way as writers. But were you ever sort of saying, we can't make him too bad, we have to show that he's justified, we have to show that this is what he has evolved into, which is that he's not a very good person sometimes, even though he deep down inside is? Do you see what I mean? There's that dichotomy of the character, where in any story that at least partly is driven by revenge.
Do you want to go first, Jeff? You want me to go first?
Yes, he does a lot of bad things. The best people that have done bad things, and the worst people that there are not as bad as the worst thing they've done. That's always been my philosophy, and that's how I create heroes and villains in my fictional work, and I think it's how people really are. He was forced into situations that made him behave the way he did, but I think that he was essentially a good person. I think we tried to paint him that way in the book.
Yeah, and I would add to that, of all the words you said, Robert, the one that we in my family gravitate towards is desperado, because desperate times, desperate circumstances create desperate decisions. And, I think a lot of times when in my Hollywood career, when I talk about this story, it's interesting. For some of the feedback is like, well, we're looking for something a little more uplifting. And my joke is always like, well, it's uplifting to us. It may not be uplifting to you, but maybe you were not on the right side of that. But for us, it's a story of someone who persevered and endured and took it till they couldn't, and then did something about it. And I think that the world needs a lot more of that. He's
basically a folk hero, no matter what.
Yeah.
And then,
absolutely.
All right, so now let's talk about the mythology of it a little bit. You even say it in the prologue, I believe, where, or maybe the afterword, I forget what it is now, but you say this is a work of fiction, but it's also based on a true story, and we're just here to tell a story. And I'm paraphrasing it, obviously. Mm-hmm. So without again giving away any of the plot, where did the truth begin and imagination start? Was there any particular points in there that you wanted to go a little bit off the rails with what anyone may know about the real life person that he was?
A lot of the details of his adventures, in the specifics of we know he tried to get revenge against the people who brutalized Rosita and him. But historically, we don't know who those people were. So so they're fictional. We know that he stole a lot of horses. He robbed gold from various people, but we don't know from whom or exactly how or where. The details of his story are mostly lost in the shadows of time, and so we had to make up a lot of that.
And I would say that some of that, when you talk about, let's talk about the gold, for example, and I think it's reflected in some incidences in the book. There's legends that he was Robin Hood, that he gave the gold to the poor, right? And there's scholars that want to say that's all legendary and folkloric and everything like that. But I would say that in other books and in my family, and when Jeff and I are talking, we're like, well, just like in a mob movie where a neighborhood will keep someone safe from intruders because they want that person to win. I think if you want to make the story about what does some of that gold do? Well, it buys things for people that are going to later hide that person. And that means that makes narrative sense. It makes emotional sense. And it seems to stitch together some scholarly stuff here and some scholarly stuff here. And it turns it into a fun incident and event in our story, and I think that's an example of where I think our soup gets made. I think also, Jeff and I spent some time talking about Harry Love, who's also a real character. And we talked about creating a relationship between them that pre-exists the hunt. And again, that made narrative sense and emotional sense to us, because if the governor's going to give money to somebody and say, go find this person, it probably is somebody that knows what that person looks like. And so, in that era, that wasn't something that was easily gotten. And so we were like, we're just looking at it from the point of view of people who tell stories, people who've had stories told to them, and trying to figure it all out.
Okay. Jeffrey?
I just agree with that. He's got it.
Okay. I'm always curious when there's such a lengthy epic story here, especially a novel, not so much what Peter's used to working in television. So when you have two collaborators like this, what was the writing process? Was it throwing back ideas back and forth, and then one of you would actually put it down on the page and the other one would go through it? How did that work?
Well, I think that Jeff had gotten a big start on it. And then when I got involved, we had all those things you just said, phone conversations, emails. Did we Zoom? Did we Zoom?
No, we didn't Zoom, but
we didn't
lots
Zoom.
of
We
emails.
cut lots of emails and then phone calls and sharing pages. And it was a task that, I don't even know if my assistant is here or is going to watch this later, but Jonas was incredible to keep track of all of that.
Yes.
Because Jeff has his own deadlines on his other projects, and so do I. And Jonas was really great at keeping me and Jeff focused when we needed to be.
Yeah.
And how long did the entire process take from, I guess, when you both got together, not so much when Jeffrey started it?
What would you say? How many?
7, 8 months.
Something like that.
After you came in. Yeah.
Let's call it 9 months, so it's a full pregnancy. Let's just say 9 months.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive because it's a long and very involved book. And I'm sure your experience writing Western novels, Jeffrey, you already had the details of what life was like in the mid 1800s pretty much down, right?
I had some of it, but it took a lot of research. I had stacks and stacks of reference books beside the desk.
In fact, there's a bunch of pictures and things that, and I don't know if I've told you this, Jeff, but I was in a meeting for a movie. It's totally separate than this. And someone threw a picture up of this picture of miners in front of a sod house, the dirt house. And I was like, I had a gasp in the moment that they were like, "What's up?" And I go, "That's a picture that I used for this other thing that I'm doing." And like, I can't believe two people in the world have seen that picture. But you know, I think that the world of scholar work and the internet just gets a lot of that material. You got to piece through it. There's also a book that a few books, but there was a book that was assembled a long time ago that tried to put everything in order, and it got jumbled and was hard to get through, but there's a lot of good photos and references there of what it was like then. And also, like Jeff, I grew up in Tucson, and my family, my dad lived on a ranch that's about 20 minutes north of the border. And so his life growing up on that ranch in the 50s, to be honest, minus the Ford truck that was probably around, is not much different than what it was to be a ranch hand back then. You know.
When you look at the readership for this, or the audience for this, I should say, I mean, it has just about everything for people who like good adventures. It has a love story. It has a revenge as a driving motive. It has that amazing character arc. But the one thing that obviously sets it apart is that it's a world that a lot of mainstream, and by mainstream, I mean non-Latinos, may not be used to, you know, they know all about the cowboys. They rarely get the other side. And we mentioned the word bandito before. They think of Treasure of the Sierra Madre. They think of, you know, whatever. So when you write a book like this, it has, with all its universal themes and plots, are you thinking, let everybody come to it? Or did you write it specifically for a certain market that would, of Latinos who would say, this is a folk hero for us, and then maybe let everybody else enjoy it?
No, I never write to a specific audience because I don't know. In this particular case, I don't know that audience. I'm not of that audience. And I would have a hard time tailoring something to that. But in general, I write for myself first. The books that I want to read, but that don't exist, so I have to write them. And then I hope and pray that the audience comes to it. And this one, I think the audience is coming to and will continue to come to. You know, we've had fantastic reviews and mentions in the press. We were on a list today from people on Espanol magazine of 5 titles every Latino should read that begins with Isabel Allende and includes this book.
Wow.
Which was astonishing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So
and
thrilled.
I think you always do as a writer. I think you always, what Jeffrey said is exactly right. In fact, I was just in a webinar with a comic book writer and Scott Snyder, and talking about like, you write things that you think like, this is something I want to go buy and read myself. And I think to your point though, Robert, I think when you have an underserved community and you do something that's good and has good quality and is passionate and well-made, you're going to get people excited. Let's like that list from the people in Espanol, like, people are going to respond because it's really good and they don't have a ton of other things to compare it to. And I think that's really the truth. I mean, and I'm excited that it's out there. I mean, the feedback I get from people is incredible. I mean, that it's out there and they're excited about it. And, you know, I braved COVID to go sign some books at my local bookstore last week, and people came out, and it was great.
Okay. Now, this is a question I have to ask. I'll ask this of both of you, but I might be a little more directed to Peter. A good book never has just one life. It's translated, and you know, I don't know if you're thinking of putting it into Spanish, which would be a natural. But also, obviously, with your background, I think I buried the lead earlier. You are, obviously, to introduce you, you are a very well-known showrunner and executive producer. And, you know, so when you, I'm sure when you started planning the book, and then at the conclusion, you knew that it was going to become, it was going to go to the screen, whether small or large. And the way it was written, as a tribute to both of you, like I said earlier, it's very cinematic and the way it is. How do you see it going? Or what is your plan for it? Should it be a mini series, which is what I looked at, or what I, you know, would have considered? Because you can't just tell this in 2 hours or 2.5 hours. This really has to be a sprawling, old-fashioned Western from, you know, told like this. Am I on the right track here, or?
Well, from your mouth to, you know, the good Lord's ear, I hope so. I mean, I think that there's, I'm trying to be politic, but I fail at that so often. I'm just going to say it. I mean, there's a lot of roadblocks to telling a story like this on the screen. As much as people say they're interested in this, you know, this kind of thing, there's always something looming right around the corner that's like, well, not right now. You know, I alluded to the earlier, like, hey, can it be more uplifting? And you're like, I don't know. It's uplifting to a lot of people. And so I think that this is certainly a big deal that will hopefully help gather that momentum to do that. I think that we would love to talk about it being a miniseries. We'd love to talk to somebody if they want to make it a movie. Of course, I have agents. Of course, Jeffrey has agents, and we have people that are trying to figure that out right now, along with some really good partners that are helping us. But the future, you know, is unwritten yet, and we're very excited about that possibility. Then.
Absolutely.
Okay. Someone asked a question while we were on. Someone named Lee asks, who would you envision as Joaquin if you were casting it? And before you answer that, I was going to ask that of you guys as well. As I'm reading it, I'm thinking, okay, he's going to grow, and you know, the character grows up from a teenager to a man. But when you mentioned the tres dedo guy, 3 fingers, I'm thinking young Danny Trejo. But you know, he would be too old now. But that's the first guy I thought of, this rough-looking character that looks like a born killer. So let me just ask you guys, and throw it out to you guys, because I know when you're writing, sometimes you are envisioning these people like they're alive and real in your heads.
I've always thought of Trejo as Tres Dedos for sure.
Really? Okay.
Always. I mean, I know his age, but I'm saying, just if you're asking about what are the pictures in my head.
Yeah.
Oh, it's for sure that. Did you have someone in your head besides Trejo for Trace?
No, Jeff? I don't really cast the parts that way.
Yeah.
So.
It helps me not lock in, but it helps me just when I'm starting to walk people around in my head, if I can just picture them. And for Joaquin, I mean, it's such an incredible role, right? To go from an innocent to this person who's fully emerged, to go from someone who's in love to someone with that kind of anguish, and then that mission. I mean, it's a real tour de force for somebody.
It's a juicy part.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if people in this webinar would know, but like, and I don't know if they're right for it, but I will say that, again, when I talk to my friend Gigi, there's an actor named Richard Cabral, who is in the Mayans, and I've seen him do a movie where he started off as this very, you know, it's a contemporary movie, but like wearing a sweater and, you know, very forthright and earnest, and then took a turn and became, you know, who they look like more on the Mayans. And so I'm just in my mind looking for someone with that kind of range in my head.
Okay. And for Jeffrey, we were talking about, you know, a book always has, or a good story always has separate lives. You know, you're such a prolific graphic novelist and comic book writer. Do you see this being at least put into that medium on your end?
Peter and I are talking about that and talking to some artist representatives, and whether it would be translating this or adapting this directly to a graphic novel, or just telling additional stories about Joaquin in a comic book or graphic novel format.
Yeah, in a more serialized format, perhaps.
Definitely want to.
I'm a big fan. I mean, I wrote my first comic book last year.
Yeah, that's great.
And all about a henchman. And
a henchman.
So, yeah, it's named Rafael Garcia Henchman. It's basically my answer to going to all the Marvel movies with my two boys, with Joaquin and Dan, and having them say, where are the Mexicans in the Marvel universe? Where are they? And I was like, well, let me tell you a story about one that I'm going to make up right now. And so Rafael is a henchman who's starting to wonder if he's not working for the wrong side or not, because of all the crazy shit they make him do. And so my appetite is whetted for that format, and it's another pleasure and thrill to work with Jeff. I bought and consumed books of his before I knew him.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that's absolutely something that we're working toward.
Okay, well, I'm glad. I like I said, you have to have many lives with an amazing story like this.
Yep.
Before I turn it over to a Q&A, we've taken up a lot of time with this. The one thing I wanted to know is, without giving away the end, there is part of the legend is an amazing, like I said, I don't want to give it away, but you stuck to that legend, and gave it a nice little twist. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to commend you on that, because I was wondering if you were going to go that way and how you were going to pull that off. And again, I don't want to give it away to anybody on here. The last thing I would like to ask is, I've read where people say it's his legend, Joaquin's legend, is mistakenly the inspiration for Zorro, and a lot of other people say it was. What do you guys think? I mean, is it out there that that's what it is?
Let me grab something real quick. Peter, if you want to talk for a second.
I do. I'm excited for what I think you're getting. I've heard that. And I've also heard that, Bob Kane got some inspiration from Zorro to create Batman. And so I don't know, there's part of me that's the comedy writer, right? That's not the writer we're meeting tonight, but the comedy writer loves to think of somehow Joaquin Murrieta going all the way to the Adam West Batman from 1967 and what the hell that's like. But so I don't know for sure, but I bet Jeff has more research done around the Zorro specifics, but I've read that it was.
Yeah, so that's my fact. Go ahead.
This is going to show up backwards on your screen. This is Zorro's Shadow by an associate professor at Louisiana State University named Stephen Andes. And it is the story of, the subtitle is How a Mexican Legend Became America's First Superhero. And it is the story of how Joaquin became Zorro, and then what happened to Zorro and how Zorro influenced all the superheroes that came after. He had the cave, he had the vehicle, he had the disguise, he had the secret identity. He had all the tropes that make a superhero. And according to Stephen, who researched it in great depth and went to Trincheras and studied the landscape there and the family there, and he's convinced.
And then I'll add one piece on that. There's a Professor Aldama who does a lot of pop culture. Do you know him, Jeff?
The name sounds familiar.
He's done a lot of pop culture books. He wrote a book about the Hernandez brothers, Love and Rockets, and he's written a bunch of books. He did a foreword for Marvel's like 80-page giant that was all about Latinx superheroes in the Marvel universe recently. And he hit me up and he was like, hey, you're going to want to check this out, because I guess he did some interview and almost like a fast answer round. Like somebody goes, well, who's the first Mexican American superhero? And he's like, Joaquin Murrieta, next question. And it was like really cool that he was like, yep, this is my research. This is what I got to.
Yeah. Nice. Any questions? I didn't see any from the audience. I don't know if you've been seeing the little pop-ups. There's a lot of people excited about the ideas for it and all. So I think we're almost at the hour anyway. Do you guys want to add anything at this point?
I am indebted to the bookstore for hosting us, and to you, Robert, for coming on and doing this with us. It's great to.
This was my pleasure. It really was. Yeah.
And of course to Peter for his family and for his stories and for his friendship. It's just been a fantastic experience all the way along.
It's mutual, Jeff, and I want to also thank the bookstore. And I promise the next time I'm in New York, I'm going to come by. I'm going to spend a lot of money there.
Sure. Too.
And if anyone from the bookstore gets out here to the sunny coast, find me on social media and let's figure out a way I'll take you to my local bookstore.
There you go.
Okay. All right. One last little question. I would imagine that in this era we're living in over the last 2 years, writing a book just totally changes the rules on how to promote it. And thankfully there's mediums like Zoom and everything else, but it must be a little bit tougher and just changes the game. I mean, even to the point where Peter was, probably a little tentative to go out in public.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I will say that I'm thankful for all the fans that are like still dedicated, but I still want everybody to be safe. And I feel like, almost to like leave people with a question, like in what we do, certainly what I do in the TV shows I'm working on right now, like one of the conversations we're having is, the first year of a pandemic, everyone was like, well, we'll just get ready for it to be over. And maybe we'll do one episode where we go, boy, I'm glad that was over. And then we'll move forward. In the second year of the pandemic, people are like, well, maybe we'll just ignore it totally in what we do. And that'll be fine because it'll be over soon. And in the third year, I think we have to start to realize that this is where we're at. And we need to start creating the stories that will incorporate it, not even directly, but like this is the biggest thing that's happened to maybe most of us in our lifetime. And when I talk to young writers, I always say, like, you're going to be writing about this in one way or another for maybe the rest of your adult life. Like, this is a thing.
It's here now. Yeah, I was a presenting author at the Tucson Festival of Books for its first 12 years. Every year, there were only 4 of us who had done that. And 2 years ago, it was canceled. And last year, it was canceled. And this coming year, they say it's going to be in person again, but who knows? That's the biggest book event in Arizona by far, and the biggest book event I do every year. And I don't know if I'll do it. I've done exactly one library event since the pandemic began, and it was very small.
I will say, on a hopeful note, one of the things that saved my local bookstore was a campaign where people who could just started buying gift certificates that they were never going to use,
Yep.
And so if you want to support your bookstore, you want to support Word Up, you want to support people that are selling books, like think about that if you can afford that. It's a wonderful way to show people that you care.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you guys. That's a good place to end it. And again, my pleasure. This was great. Carolina just put up where to get gift cards at the store. So,
excellent.
All right. Good luck with this and congratulations. It was, the easiest 590 pages I ever went through. So
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
you,
take care. Take care.
Take care.
We'll meet again.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.